A bright breeze rolled in from the ocean as Emily stepped onto the wide expanse of sunlit pavement. She paused for a moment, taking in the sight before her. Hundreds of gleaming motorcycles lined up in neat rows, their chrome tanks and polished fenders reflecting the clear blue sky. Flags snapped lightly in the wind, and the roar of engines mingled with laughter and the hum of conversation. A warm sense of excitement pulsed through the air. This was the small coastal town's annual charity motorcycle rally, and everyone seemed eager to be a part of it. Even the seagulls wheeling overhead, calling out as if they, too, wanted to join the fun. Emily's heart skipped a beat as she raised her camera, a junior reporter for her university newspaper. She had arrived early to capture every moment. She let her fingers dance over the buttons, framing quick shots of leather jackets hanging on chrome handlebars, of men and women with weathered faces and bright smiles, of colorful banners strung from lampposts to tents. Her story would be about community, generosity, and the surprising kindness that often hid under rough exteriors. She moved steadily, her steps soft against the hot asphalt, determined to find the most telling images. Not far away, a group of 4 bikers stood, close together, their laughter echoing across the lot. They wore worn leather vests patched with names and symbols, boots scuffed from years on the road, and bandanas tied around their necks. 2 of them had broad shoulders and thick arms, their tattoos peeking out from beneath their sleeves. Other 2 were leaner, with easy grins and bright eyes that caught every movement in the crowd. Their friendly teasing felt natural and warm, as though they had known each other for decades. They joked about who had the shiniest tank, whose engine roared the loudest, and whose route to get here had been the wildest. Emily wandered closer, drawn by the ripple of their laughs. She squatted down to photograph a vintage chopper that gleamed like a jewel in the afternoon sun. She adjusted her lens, her focus tight on the polished metal, then stood up to check the shot. As she did, 2 of the bikers shifted their weight and turned just enough for Emily to catch a glimpse of. Their eyes following her path, she straightened, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, but did not look back. Emily told herself it was nothing, just curious glances in a crowded event. She walked on, her camera clicking softly as she moved toward a tent selling homemade lemonade. The rally grounds stretched out around her, a patchwork of tents and tables and banners. In one corner, a group of volunteers handed out flyers explaining how the rally fees would support the local youth center. In another, children sat coloring posters of motorcycles they dreamed of riding someday. The smell of grilled burgers and sweet kettle corn mixed with the salty tang of sea air. Every now and then, a rider kicked his stand up with a loud thump, and the soft rumble of his engine rolled over the crowd. Emily felt the energy of it all, the way people came together. In celebration, sudden cheer rose up nearby, and Emily turned to see a large banner unfold above a food stall. Under it stood 2 tall figures she recognized instantly from magazine covers and movie posters. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and John Cena were here for a surprise meet and greet, invited by the rally organizers to draw an even bigger audience. The crowd pressed forward, phones raised, eager to glimpse the famous men. Emily's breathing quickened with excitement. She had to get closer, not just for the photos, but also for the story, to world-famous personalities coming to this small town was newsworthy in itself. She wove through people, her camera swinging at her side, until she stood among the fans behind a simple rope barrier. The Rock and Cena stood at a long table, signing posters and shaking hands. Dwayne's easy grin and good-natured pauses, as he chatted with each fan, made them laugh. John's bright smile and friendly nods drew applause. Emily raised her camera again, capturing the moment the 2 of them high-fived a little girl holding a homemade sign. She clicked again as they posed for selfies, their broad shoulders filling the frame and their faces warm under the afternoon sun. When Emily glanced away from her camera's viewfinder, she noticed that the bikers from before had moved closer. They stood behind a row of custom choppers, watching the meet and greet with idle interest. Their joking had stopped, and they gave each other quick looks as they followed Emily's path across the lot. She frowned, uneasy at the thought that they might still be paying attention to her. Turning back, she caught their gazes lifting and dropping as though trying to decide something. Emily's pulse quickened. She reminded herself she was among friends, and that the rally was a happy event. Yet a small knot of worry formed in her stomach. At the signing table, The Rock leaned toward John and said something that made both of them nod. Cena stepped back, giving a thumbs up to a group of teenagers behind him. Dwayne's eyes scanned the crowd, and Emily sensed he had noticed something too. She lowered her camera and watched silently. The moment felt electric, as though something unexpected was about to happen. The roar of an engine nearby made her jump, but she kept her gaze fixed on Dwayne and John, wondering if they had seen what she had. Emily took a steadying breath and reminded herself why she was here. She thought of the youth center, of the families who relied on these funds, of the mix of strangers who had come together today with a shared goal. She stood tall, her camera now resting against her chest, and gave a small, determined nod to herself. The rally was more than a show of strength and speed. It was a chance for people to step up, to protect each other, and to show care in unexpected ways. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, and the engines continued to hum, Emily braced herself, for the rest of the day unaware that soon she would need that quiet courage more than ever. Emily stepped away from the crowd around the star table and drifted toward a neat line of vintage motorcycles. She felt a soft breeze lift the edge of her light skirt, and for a moment she closed her eyes, letting the sun warm her face. Around her, the engines of the bikes were still warm, their metal bodies glowing like new, despite their age. She ran her fingers gently along the smooth fender of a cherry-red chopper, admiring how the paint curved into the gas tank. The smell of motor oil and hot metal mixed with sea air, and she breathed it in, feeling both calm and alive. A short distance behind her, 4 bikers leaned against their machines. One of them, named Rick, joked about a dent in his friend's pickup. Another Joe laughed and shook his head, saying that he would never admit to such a mistake at home. The third, Sam, teased Joe for being too soft, and the fourth, Mark, agreed that real bikers never let a little scrape bother them. Their laughter was light and easy, as though nothing could spoil their fun today. They wore simple white t-shirts, under leather vests, and each had a pair of sunglasses perched on his forehead. Emily raised her camera to capture the neat row of bikes. She knelt down to get a low angle, focusing on the long chrome exhaust pipe that stretched out like a gleaming snake beside the front wheel. She clicked the shutter, then stood and checked the image on her small screen. The picture was perfect. The sun made the chrome shine, and the deep red paint looked almost alive. She tapped to save the shot and looked back at the scene. Something made her heart skip, not loud or insistent, but enough to send a ripple of unease through her. The bikers had stopped their chatter and were watching her more closely now. Mark nudged Sam, pointing discreetly in Emily's direction. They exchanged quick glances and small nods, as though agreeing on a plan. Rick took off his sunglasses and folded his arms, eyes on Emily's form. Joe tipped back on one ankle, still leaning against his bike, watching with a slow grin. Emily caught Sam's reflection in a mirror bright fender. She straightened her shoulders and raised her chin, reminding herself that she was in a safe place among community volunteers and families. She snapped a few more photos, moving slowly from one bike to the next. Her skirt fluttered around her knees in the breeze, and she was aware of how bright it looked against the dark leather jackets. She thought of her editors back at the campus. Paper. They would love these shots for tomorrow's headline. She imagined the story's lead. Riders and stars joined forces for charity. She pictured the banner she would hang above her article, featuring a shot of The Rock high-fiving a child. That image made her smile inside, and she lifted her camera to look for that perfect moment. But just then, she felt a sharp tug at the hem of her skirt. It happened so fast that, for a moment, she thought the breeze had caught it again. Then she realized it was no breeze. 2 strong hands had gripped the back of her skirt and lifted it. Up, she gasped, the camera dropping from her fingers with a soft thud against the sun-baked asphalt. Her face burned with surprise and shame as she tried to pull her skirt back down. She heard the stunned hush of the crowd around her, as though the noise of engines and laughter had been cut off in one sharp slice. Emily froze, her mind spinning. She felt the eyes of dozens of people on her, some in shock, some in silent embarrassment, and some still waiting to laugh. Her hands moved trembling to tug her skirt back into place. She pressed the fabric down tightly around her waist, as though that small motion could block out the humiliation she felt. Her cheeks felt hot, and her breath came in quick, shallow bursts. The sweet salt of the sea air tasted harsh in her mouth. For a few seconds, she did not speak. She only stood there, rooted by shock. Then a quiet voice broke through. An older woman who had been resting on a folding chair nearby stood up, hands on her hips. "That is wrong," she said firmly, her voice steady and clear. "No one has the right to do that." A few other bystanders nodded, and one man folded his arms and stared at the bikers with an expression of deep disapproval. The wind seemed too still for a moment, as if the world held its breath. Emily felt a small spark of relief at the woman's words. She looked at the group of 4 men. Rick took a step back, eyes wide. Joe let out a short, awkward laugh and glanced at his friends. Sam rubbed the back of his neck as though he suddenly felt self-conscious. Mark looked toward the sign that reminded all riders to respect each person's space. Emily cleared her throat, voice small but firm. "Don't ever do that again," she said. The words felt strange on her lips, as though she were speaking. In a dream, she reached down and picked up her camera, clutching it like a shield. Her fingers trembled as she slipped it into the small satchel at her side. The bikers shuffled their feet, moving uneasily on the hot ground. Rick looked at Sam and muttered something. Sam shook his head and stepped forward, raising a hand as though to say sorry, but before he could speak, a low murmur rolled up from the crowd. People were talking in small clusters, their voices hushed but insistent. A young man wearing a rally t-shirt bent down to scoop up a fallen flyer, then handed it to Emily with a quick nod. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. Emily managed a small smile. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice shook. She thanked him and kept walking, putting as much distance between herself and the bikers as she could. Each step felt heavy, but with every footfall she felt a little more in control. Behind her, she heard a rumble, not the roar of an engine, but a deep, steady sound that made her head turn. On a slightly raised platform, The Rock was leaning forward, his brow furrowed with a look she had seen in movies when he was faced with something unfair. John Cena stood beside him, arms folded, eyes downcast, clearly watching the same scene. They had been signing autographs, but now their focus had shifted. Millie realized that they had noticed what had happened to her. Dwayne Johnson's voice cut across the hum of the crowd, low but carrying to every ear. Security did not shout, but the firmness in his words made people pay attention. John stepped forward, taking off his hat in one smooth motion and tucking it under his arm. He gave Emily a quick, encouraging nod that said without words, "You are safe." Security guards in bright vests began to weave through the spectators, heading toward where Emily had stood. The bikers looked at each other, expressions of guilt and worry on their faces. Emily steadied herself against a wooden post, gripping the rough paint with white knuckles. Her heart pounded, but the panic that had flooded her a moment ago was thinning. She felt the eyes of supportive strangers on her, felt the presence of the 2 heroes who had silently promised to stand by her side. The sky remained bright, the breeze continued to dance through her hair, and the distant cry of seagulls reminded her that life moved on. She drew in a deep breath, feeling both small and strong at the same time. She did not know what would happen next, but she knew she was no longer alone. The rally carried on around her, but Emily felt a shift in its energy. Something quiet and powerful had begun. And in that moment she waited, her hands calm at her sides for what would come after. The moment stretched like a held breath. Emily stood frozen, her skirt clutched at her waist, while the crowd around her wavered between shock and unease. Then, without any loud fanfare, 2 powerful figures moved through the throng. Dwayne Rock Johnson's tall frame carved a steady path toward Emily. Beside him, John Cena advanced with hands open and eyes focused. Their calm confidence felt stronger than any engine roar, and conversation around them hushed as people stepped aside, giving way. Emily's heart pounded in her ears as she watched them approach. The warmth of their presence cut through her fear like sunlight after a storm. Rick, Joe, Sam, and Mark, the 4 men who had crossed a line, stood stiff and uncertain before the 2 champions. Dwayne came to a halt a few feet away, folding his massive arms. His face was serious but kind, his deep voice low as he spoke so that only the bikers could hear. "That's not okay," he said. His words had no anger, only firm truth. "You have to respect others?" John stood next to Emily, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder without touching roughly. He offered his denim jacket, the thick material easy to slip around her shoulders. "Here," he said quietly. "This might help you feel safer." Emily paused, her fingers trembling as she accepted the jacket. She wrapped it around her waist, the soft denim covering the worst of her shame. The gesture felt like an unspoken promise. She would not face this alone. The bikers looked from Emily to the two men before them. Joe swallowed hard, his grin gone. Rick's jaw worked as though he struggled to find words. Sam shuffled his feet, gaze fixed on the ground, while Mark cleared his throat unevenly. The crowd watched, waiting for what would come next. Some shivered in sympathy for Emily. Others crossed their arms, ready to back the wrestlers if needed. A few held their phones up, recording silently, as though even a glitch in justice could be captured. Dwayne turned his attention back to Emily, his voice softening. "Are you all right?" he asked. Emily blinked, her voice stuck for a moment. Then she found it. "Yes, thank you." She managed a small nod, feeling tears that hot and surprising. John gave her a gentle smile and a thumbs up. "You're safe now," he said. The simplicity of those words made Emily's chest unclench. Then Dwayne addressed the bikers again. "You owe her an apology," he said. He did not shout, he did not rough them up. He just stood there, solid as a rock, and spoke justice. "Show some honor." Mark cleared his throat and stepped forward. He crouched slightly, looking up at Emily. "I'm sorry," he said, voice quiet. Joe followed, shamed but sincere. "Me too. I didn't think." Rick spoke next, shoulders slumped. "I'm sorry, Emily." Sam's apology was the last, soft and earnest. "I'm sorry." The words fell into the hushed air, and Emily felt a strange relief. They meant what they said. Behind the wrestlers, a small knot of rally volunteers moved in. A man in an orange safety vest pressed a walkie-talkie to his mouth. "We've got the scene under control," he said. Few uniformed security guards arrived and stood beside Dwayne and John. They swept their eyes across the crowd to make sure no one else might step out of line. Emily realized how many people cared, the older woman who had spoken up, the college student who handed her the flyer, the strangers who watched but did not laugh. She drew a shaky breath and let it out slowly. Dwayne crouched down to Emily's level, his broad frame folding without strain. "If you need anything," he said gently, "just tell me." She nodded, the weight in her chest lightening. John reached into his pocket and pulled out a small water bottle. "Here," he said, handing it to Emily, "drink a little." The water felt cool against her trembling hands. She unscrewed the cap, drank, and felt the waves of calm wash over her. The crowd murmured approval. Few people clapped softly, more in relief than celebration. The rally atmosphere shifted. What had felt like a place of playful fun now felt like a place of real care, of people looking out for one another. Engines started up again, but now the roars were tempered by laughter and conversation about what had happened. A father lifted his young daughter so she could see the Rock and Cena. A teenager held up a sign that said "Stay strong" with an arrow pointing at Emily. Emily spotted her camera bag. A few feet away on the ground. She walked over to reclaim it, her hand steadier now. She picked it up, zipped it shut, and slung it over her shoulder. A lens cap clicked in place. She met the eyes of the bikers. Their faces looked smaller beside her reclaimed composure. Rick nodded at her. "Go on with your day," he said. His voice was rough but respectful. Emily offered a quiet thank you, meaning only that she would try to continue. John turned back to the bikers and spoke to them in a tone that brooked no argument. "If you want to be part of this community," he said, "you learn respect," Dwayne added. "It's what real champions do." The sound of children's laughter drifted in from a picnic area nearby. Music played softly at a concession stand. The rally's heartbeat returned, steady and bright. As the Rock and Cena moved back toward the signing table, Emily felt an unexpected swell of pride. She had faced embarrassment, and regained her dignity. In front of hundreds of onlookers, she had listened to apologies and felt the promise of change. She had seen two famous heroes treat a simple act of kindness like their most important mission. All around, everyday people whispered about what they had seen. The story Emily would write was no longer just about motorcycles and charity. It was about courage, about speaking up, about the power of respect. She stepped forward, wanting to capture just one more shot, a picture of The Rock and John Cena walking away from the small circle they had formed, side by side in their casual gear, arms gently guiding Emily toward safety. She framed the shot so their backs led through the crowd, like protectors guiding a friend home. Click. The flash was soft, and her shutter clicked quietly. Turning from the scene, Emily squared her shoulders and let her skirt fall naturally. She walked toward a shaded pavilion where volunteers handed out ice cream. She had been shaken, but she had regained her calm. Her story would honor everyone who stood up, from the older woman who spoke first to the headline heroes who moved the world just by choosing to care. The rally still buzzed with engines and laughter, but now Emily felt part of something deeper, a promise that kindness would always find its way. And as she licked her melting scoop of vanilla, she knew her day's work had only just begun. The rally's mood shifted again, as Emily enjoyed her melting ice cream under the shade of a striped canopy. She let the cold sweetness calm her racing thoughts. Nearby, she saw the rally organizer, a tall woman with a clipboard and a bright red She let the cold sweetness calm. She let the cold sweetness, homed head. More way. So, was in the well, son. I said, well, there is a Mel. Orange vest, striding toward the circle where the bikers still stood. The organizer's face was firm but not angry. She carried herself with dignity, as though she knew every person here deserved to be heard and treated with respect. Emily watched as the organizer reached the bikers and knelt slightly to speak with them quietly. She motioned toward the small stage area where a few volunteers were packing up supplies. The four men looked at her, nodding in slow agreement, and followed her lead. Emily's heart fluttered at the thought that things might finally move toward real change, not just apologies offered in passing. A hush spread over the crowd as the organizer raised her voice just enough for everyone to hear. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, we cannot allow disrespect in our community. These bikers have agreed to make things right. She gestured toward the group of men who stepped forward. Emily felt her pulse quickened. Everyone's eyes were on her, but she was no longer afraid. She stood tall, arms loose at her sides, her denim jacket tied neatly around her waist. One by one, the bikers spoke. Mark stepped up first, wiping his hands on his vest. I want to say I'm truly sorry, he said. His voice quivered slightly, but he met Emily's eyes. I acted without thinking, and I hurt you. I know I was wrong. A few people in the crowd nodded in approval. Rick went next, ran a hand through his hair and frowned. I can't undo what happened, he said, but I owe you respect and an apology. His words were simple, but sincere. Sam spoke quietly, voice almost lost in the warm breeze. I let the others do something hurtful, he admitted, and I should have stopped them. I'm sorry, Emily. Joe was the last. He squared his shoulders and took a deep breath before speaking. I thought it was a joke, he said, but it was cruel, and I'm sorry for how it made you feel. Emily felt a lump in her throat as she listened. None of these apologies wiped away the memory, but each one felt honest and brave. The organizer stepped forward again. Actions speak louder than words, she said. So these men will join our next workshop on women's safety and respect. We'll listen, learn, and help. She nodded at the volunteers across the field. A few steps away, tables were set up for a session that would start in an hour. Emily felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this promise would grow into real understanding, not just a single day's promise. Before the men walked away, the organizer invited them to shake hands with Emily. Mark reached out first. His hand was rough and warm, but his grip was gentle. Emily took it, feeling a spark of connection. Rick and Sam shook her hand next, each offering a quiet thank you for showing them the right path. Joe lingered last, his hand firm and respectful. When they released her hand, Emily felt a surprising sense of closure. It did not erase her shock, but it did seal a promise of change. As the bikers headed toward the workshop tables, Emily saw volunteers greet them with friendly smiles. The men looked around, their eyes open as they sat at a folding chair. A volunteer handed them a folder of materials about listening and respect. Emily imagined them learning new words, new ways to understand other people's feelings. She felt relief that they would have a chance to grow. The crowd around Emily began to move again as engines rumbled back to life. Laughter and conversation returned, though now the tone felt more thoughtful. Parents whispered to their children about kindness. Teenagers pointed to the workshop tables, nodding their approval. A few riders stopped by Emily, patting her gently on the shoulder and offering cold water bottles. One older man, whose leather vest was covered with patches, said quietly, "You did the right thing. Stay strong." Emily smiled, her heart lighter than it had been all day. She stepped away from the stage area and wandered toward the youth tent, where children were painting signs. She watched a little boy dip his brush into red paint, carefully tracing the letters of respect. A girl next to him painted a band of blue across her paper. Emily knelt beside them and asked what they were painting. The boy looked up and said, "We're making a sign so everyone knows to be nice." The girl beamed and added, "I want to make the world better." Emily felt tears prick her eyes. For a moment she closed her camera bag and simply watched these children. They laughed softly as paint dripped onto the grass. No one teased them or made them feel small. They had space to learn and to be heard. Emily realized what had happened. Earlier was a test of community. The prank had cut too close, but the kindness and bravery of so many people had made the rally stronger. A volunteer spotted Emily and waved her over. It was the same woman who had first spoken up. She handed Emily a small certificate card. "Because you spoke out," she said, "we'd like to honor your courage." The card read, "Stand up for respect," with the rally's logo stamped in bright ink. Emily's smile was wide as the volunteer shook her hand. She tucked the card into her satchel. As the sun began to dip nearer the horizon, the rally's final event was about to start. A group ride along the coastal road. Bikers lined up, engines purring, their headlights ready. Emily took her place at the front with her camera. She felt the cool ocean breeze on her face and thought about everything that had happened that day. The stolen moment of shame, the protective presence of two giants, the honest apologies, the promise of learning, the hope reflected in children's paintbrushes. When the signal was given, the group moved as one. The roar of bikes echoed off nearby buildings and blended with seabirds' cries. Emily raised her camera and captured a shot of the four bikers waving as they joined the ride, their faces determined and humble. She snapped another of the Rock and John Cena, standing side by side, giving each other a nod before they climbed onto their bikes. Emily took a deep breath and let the last of her fears slip away. She felt proud to be part of this story. Her article would tell of community strength, of respect earned and learned, of moments when people chose courage over cruelty. As the riders disappeared down the winding road, their lights flickering like fireflies, Emily felt sure that lasting change can begin with one simple act of speaking up, and that a crowd united by kindness is always stronger than any roar of vengeance. The sun rose the morning after the rally, painting the sky in soft pink and gold. Emily woke with a gentle ache in her shoulders from carrying her camera all day. She lay still for a moment, thinking back on everything that had happened. She felt calm now, as though the day before had washed away any fears she once carried. She reached out to grab her notebook from the bedside table and smiled at the small card tucked inside it. It read, "Stand up for respect," with the rallies logo shining in bright ink. She traced the letters with her finger and thought about the words she would write today. Emily dressed quickly, choosing a simple blouse and jeans. She tied her hair back so it would not fall in her face while she wrote, In the kitchen, her roommate had left a mug of coffee on the counter. Emily poured it into her favorite travel cup and headed to the campus library. On the way, she passed her neighbor on the sidewalk. He gave a friendly wave and said, "Hey, saw on the news last night? Brave work." Emily blushed and returned the wave. The memory of the Rock and John Cena standing by her side still felt like a dream, yet she knew it was real. It had changed her life in small but powerful ways. At the library, she found her favorite quiet corner by a window that looked out on green trees. She set her camera bag on the floor, opened her laptop, and pulled out her notebook. The screen glowed, ready for her story. She took a sip of coffee and let her fingers hover over the keys. Then she began to type. First, she described the rally itself, the polish of chrome, the hum of engines, the laughter of families and friends. She wrote in simple words about how a small moment of cruelty had turned into a chance for people to learn. She told how the older woman had spoken up first, how strangers had offered comfort, and how two famous heroes had made a quiet promise to keep her safe. As she typed, the memories felt fresh, almost like they were happening again. Next, she wrote about the bikers and their apologies. She described how honest the men had been when they said sorry, how they agreed to attend a workshop on respect and safety. She imagined them listening closely, asking questions, and really hearing what women and young people had to say. Pictured them leaving the session not as merely good guys, but as men who had learned something important about kindness and consent. Emily paused when she reached the part about her own feelings. She admitted she had been scared and humiliated in that moment. She wrote about how it felt to have her skirt lifted, how the rush of shame had hit her like a cold wave. She let herself be honest on the page because she knew her readers needed to understand how deeply even a small action could hurt someone. Then she described how capable she felt when she stood up and spoke her truth, how the strength of others had lifted her up. As she typed these words, her phone buzzed on the table beside her. A message from her editor popped up. "Can you send? The first draft by noon. We want to run it in tomorrow's print edition and feature it online." Emily glanced at the clock. It was 9:30. She had time, but she had to keep moving. She closed her eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. Then she pressed on, writing about the wider impact. She included the voices of other people who had been there. There was the father, who had lifted his daughter so she could see the scene with the Rock and Cena. He had told his little girl that everyone deserves to feel safe, even when the world seems rough. There was the teen who had painted the respect sign with bright letters and had volunteered to help run next year's rally. And there was the volunteer who handed out the certificate to Emily, calling her courage and inspiration for everyone here. Around midday, Emily hit send on her email. She leaned back and closed her eyes, feeling a relief that was warm and full. She thought about the moment she handed in her camera bag at the rally's Lost and Found, how she had walked away feeling taller and stronger. She thought about the ride that had roared off into the sunset down the coastal road, and the lights flickering like hope against the dusk. She packed up her things and headed to the student cafe for lunch. She picked up a sandwich and a glass of water, then sat by the window and watched people pass by. Her story would reach thousands, maybe more, online. She hoped that each person who read it would stop before they made a joke, remember her name, and consider how their actions affected others. She hoped readers would learn that respect was not something you earned by strength or reputation, but by simple kindness and care. After lunch, she decided to visit the youth center that the rally had supported. The doors were open, bright with light, and children's laughter spilled into the foyer. Inside, she saw new posters on the walls drawn by local kids, urging everyone to speak up and be kind. One poster even showed Emily's face in a simple sketch, her hand raised as if to say, "Stop." She felt a tear slip down her cheek at the sight. A counselor approached her and thanked her for helping raise awareness.
Ow!
He handed her a small gift bag. Inside was a keychain with the rally logo and a note that said thank you for making a difference. Emily thanked him and promised to come by for coffee and cookies tomorrow. She stepped back into the warm afternoon sunlight, hugging the gift bag to her chest. She felt the day wrap around her like a gentle hug. She pulled out her phone and saw that her article was already live online. Scores of comments praised her bravery and urged others to follow her example. One person wrote, "Your words gave me courage to speak up at work this morning." Another said, "I'm volunteering at next year's rally because of you." Scrolling through the comments, Emily felt a mix of pride and humility. She knew she had not done this alone. She thought of the Rock and John Cena, whose quiet intervention had changed everything. She wondered if they knew how much their simple actions had meant. She tapped out a quick thank you tweet to each of them, hoping they would see it. Then she switched off her phone and took a deep breath, feeling present in the moment. Later that evening, she joined friends for dinner. They crowded around a small table, sharing stories and laughter. Emily listened as one friend described it, "Funny mishap in class," another talked about her new art project, and a third announced plans for a weekend hike. Emily shared a little about the rally, enough to convey the joy in the lessons without reopening old hurt. Her friends nodded and said they would read the article first thing. The talk turned to other things: music, TV shows, dreams for the future, but Emily felt a quiet glow inside her. She knew that real change began with simple acts: a word of kindness, a word of warning, a promise to respect. That night, as she lay in bed, Emily thought back to the rally grounds under starlight. She imagined the bikers lined up for their first workshop, listening and learning. She saw the rally organizer writing the new Respect Pledge on a large banner to hang next year. She pictured the children painting their signs under that banner, filled with hope. She imagined crowds signing the pledge, promising to look out for one another. And she saw her own name in the byline of tomorrow's newspaper. Not as a hero, but as a witness to how a small act of courage can ripple outward. Emily smiled in the dark and closed her eyes. The world was wide and full of rough edges, but it was also full of promise. She had learned that she could speak up and make a difference, that she could help shape a kinder world. She felt ready for whatever tomorrow would bring: another story to write, another chance to stand up, another moment to show that respect is everything. And with that thought, she drifted off, dreaming of bright skies and quiet courage, lighting the path ahead.